it seems like such a strange strategic choice to give them these weapons and, hope that they do what you want them to do.
Many such cases in the Middle East.
Many such cases,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is in a way a nightmare for the West, at least. I would say it's quite stunning if you think about how willing the Iranians were to supply some of their best capabilities to the Houthis. I mean, the Houthis have paraded a mock-up of one missile, whether it's actually in service or whether it's just a mock-up, it's a different question. I believe it's slightly more likely it's actually in service. The Khaybar Shekan, which the Houthis call a Hatim, and that is a precision-guided missile with a range of 1,300 kilometers and some capabilities to evade missile defenses, according to Iranian. That system was only unveiled in Iran proper in 2022. And then a few months later, we already saw it in Yemen. So the Iranians were really willing to give very long-range systems and very advanced systems to the Houthis, which is quite remarkable because if you look at some of the other exports, they're more reluctant. So we haven't really seen them do any commercial export of ballistic missiles. There are reports they might be doing that with the Russians right now, but apart from that, we haven't really seen it. But when it comes to their core regional geopolitical and ideological project, they're willing to break all the rules and transfer really impressive capabilities. The other thing that is interesting here is just how technology can change politics. I'm always saying, imagine it would be in 1990 or 2000 and you had the Houthis. What could the Houthis do? The Houthis could fire artillery beyond the border for, let's say, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. They could use speedboats. Okay, they could do that to impede shipping. But then again, it's very easy to defend against a speedboat. Like commercial ships could do that themselves. They just get a few armed guards. They get perhaps a bit of foreign naval protection, and they basically have dealt with the problem. So I think it's really the fact that we now have the types of systems that can be used at standoff ranges to attack shipping, but also to attack other targets, critical infrastructure, military targets, that can be used if you don't have a large air force. That this is something which non-state actors and weaker states can use as a major force multiplier, especially if they have the right strategy, as I think the Houthis and the Iranians do.
What is that strategy?
The strategy is accepting that missiles are not the best tool for warfighting. If you actually want to defeat the Saudi military and you would try to do it using missiles, good luck with that. I mean, you're not going to destroy all Saudi air bases. You're not going to destroy all Saudi fighter jets. You're not going to destroy all Saudi tanks using a few cruise and ballistic missiles. If you have 100,000 of them, which no country on earth has, it might work. Otherwise, it doesn't. We've seen Russia use a lot of missiles in Ukraine, but the effect is just not as impressive as the Russians probably would like. But if you're using these systems to target weak points of an adversary, and that could be critical infrastructure, thinking of the Aramco attacks in 2019. Again, we don't know. The Houthis claimed responsibility. We don't know whether it was actually launched by the Houthis, by the Iranians from Iran, by the Iranians from Iraq, or a combination of all of these. But you had a very limited amount of missiles and drones being able to wreck a piece of critical infrastructure, put out of operations for a few months, and then translate that into real geopolitical leverage. And the same applies to civilian shipping in the Red Sea. I'm always thinking if this was a purely military problem, the West would be doing great. I mean, you're destroying quite a few missiles, and the rest, you can defend against them quite well. I mean, there's always a chance that one missile will get through, okay, but your navies won't get sunk. That's okay. You actually have a situation that's quite tolerable. But then you have civilian shipping companies, and they have a completely different appetite for risk, basically zero appetite for risk. And more importantly, you have the insurers, which have even less appetite for risk. So even if you have a capability that is incapable of defeating a major Western Navy or even a major Western Navy detachment to the Red Sea, it can still cause enormous disruption to civilian shipping.
How do they target the ships they're firing at? I mean, do they have access to satellites or whatever? I mean, how do you? I actually don't know how missile systems work over 1,000 miles. So,
I mean, here the thing really is that also times have changed in terms of technology, and geography is the Houthis' friend. So there's of course another country having a huge arsenal of anti-ship missiles, including anti-ship ballistic missiles, and that is China. And in that case, we were always talking about the Chinese kill chain. Do they actually have the satellites to track carriers, identify carriers in the open sea? But the Red Sea is just really, really small geographically. And then you have the Bab al-Mandab as a choke point, which is even narrower. And if that is your geography, you can use quite a lot of systems. You don't need satellites. So you can use UAVs. The Houthis have used quite a lot of UAVs for reconnaissance and for target identification. They do have the range. They don't need to be that complicated, that sophisticated. They can do that. They can use open source material. A lot of ships going through the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandab still have their transponders on, and anyone can go to a website and see their approximate location. Sometimes they put messages there, hoping it will save them from Houthi attacks, saying, oh, it's all Chinese crew or no relation to Israel whatsoever. And they put that note on, which doesn't seem to be working either. And then, of course, you can just have a few people on speedboats or on fishing vessels who hand over coordinates. And that might not be the best and the most efficient way compared to having maritime patrol aircraft and satellites, but it does the job reasonably well enough. And then, of course, as another added bonus, they have the mysterious Iranian converted cargo ship, the Bahshat, over there, which is widely suspected to be a forward operating base for the Revolutionary Guards.
It's kind of interesting that the things that happen in the ocean are so shady and strange. Mm-hmm. I don't think people understand just how lawless and weird the ocean can get. So you have all of these different ships that are claimed by 3 different countries and 3 different companies. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, the Houthis don't seem to give a shit, right? If you're passing through the territory, you are a target, period. It doesn't matter if you're saying that you're not involved. You're involved because you're part of international shipping. That makes you a target. Full stop. Yeah.
I mean, there are a few different ways of looking at this. Some people are saying, oh, the Houthis, their ISR is not that good. Their target identification is not that good. They actually want to hit ships that are connected to Israel or now connected to America and the West after the airstrikes have started, but they're just not capable of doing that. But there's also the other view, which I think is probably more realistic, that the Houthis just don't care. They want to fire at everything that goes through in order to maximize the leverage. And I mean, to me, it's a bit like hijacking an aircraft. Like, it doesn't really matter whether the aircraft is connected to your political enemy. You just do it to basically make your problem everyone's problem and gain leverage through that. I think that's really the logic behind it. And to some extent, it works.
That's interesting. I think that's a good analogy. Like Arab nationalism was in the 70s and 80s was really big on plane hijackings. Houthis is really big. The Houthis are really big on disrupting international shipping. You've said a couple times that this is about political leverage for them. What is the political goal?
Again, this is very difficult to assess because we would have to know how the decision is taken, what role the Houthis play, what role the Iranians play. I would say there are several angles here. The first is the Houthis themselves domestically. They are very unpopular. The situation in Yemen is not that great for the Houthis. The economic situation is terrible. The Houthis as a governing force are not well liked. So they can jump on the bandwagon of the Palestinian cause and try to increase their popularity inside Yemen. That is one angle. The other angle is, I would say, I'm not sure whether this is actually their calculus, but I think it would make sense, is to say that the Israelis just don't care about these things. The Israelis have reached a stage where they see this as an existential war of some sorts, and some disruption to shipping will not actually change their mind on anything. But then again, you have the Western backers of Israel, and they're more sensitive to disruptions in global trade, and you can try to put pressure on them, hoping they will put pressure on Israel. That is another logic that I would think makes sense. And then yet another layer is the whole so-called axis of resistance. So Iran has really worked to establish or support existing armed groups all around the Middle East and give them long-range weaponry in order to have some sort of coalition of non-state actors capable of fighting Israel. And I would say that this has worked quite well in many ways, but also has its limitations, as we see right now. If the Israelis decide to start an all-out assault on Gaza, all of these groups supported by Iran might have fantastic weapons, but it won't stop the Israelis from doing that. So to some extent, that approach has reached the limit of what it can do. But it still works to some extent. And within that axis of resistance, you have different elements having different capabilities and having different geographical positions. So each element can do something differently. So for example, in Iraq, you have militias that are well positioned to needle the US presence there and exact direct pressure on the US to some extent. Of course, calibrating that can be quite difficult, as we've seen. And in Yemen, you have this movement being right to one of the major trade arteries of the world. So, of course, it's quite convenient for them to use that as a lever.
War never changes.
That's all for this teaser, Angry Planet listeners. If you would like more, please go to angryplanetpod.com and kick us $9 a month. Get instant access to this episode, which is live now, as well as an RSS feed that gives you commercial-free versions of the mainline episodes, and some bonus articles. Got a lot of exciting things lined up for the month of April, but they will only be available to people who are paying subscribers. So go to angryplanetpod.com again, and we will see you very soon with another conversation about conflict on an angry planet.